is a unique being among the royal knights, in that it serves the Lord who embodied its own sense of justice with deep, unquestioning loyalty. For example, for the sake of its own justice, it won't hate its Lord even if they are called evil. When we last left off, IMPERIALDRAMON had finally broken out, but now it was forced to make a stand against Digimon, who was refusing to allow it forward, as now, still seeing it as an enemy, has decided that it would do battle to deal with this weakling once and for all.
We don't have to do this.
We can stop fighting right
here.
Pathetic. You really think you can stand against me? My lord, the three great angels put me here to defend this place. And you come here combined after being swatted away like flies. This time, I won't fail. With reason lost, it seemed that IMPERIALDRAMON was forced to fight as it charged in. Although it knows that Digimomon's far stronger, there is no other option, as it prepared to do battle. As it charged up its side blasters as it knew what it needed to do, as it was time to open fire.
Desperado Blaster!
As IMPERIALDRAMON opened fire on Digimon, Digimon didn't even move, as it knew that it could probably take this attack, seeing what the combined power of these two champions was even possible. As the blasts began to cause a smoke ring, it began to fuel the area, as all of a sudden, Digimon disappeared in a cloud of smoke. However, this was nothing, as from immediately in the clouds, it seemed that Digimon's figure was appearing, as it didn't even take a single cent of damage, as it just simply allowed the attack to hit it, and this left Digimon laughing, as Digimon said clearly, "You want to see the true power of a dragon? Then stand by." Breath of Wyvern! As the massive dragon appeared behind Digimon, it was clear that it was taking this fight to its next limit, as the last thing IMPERIALDRAMON would see is a giant blue dragon engulfing it. As the dragon smashed IMPERIALDRAMON deep into the ground, it went through the ice caverns, landing into the ground where it once was before, as the ice caves now seemed to be a familiar sight, as unfortunate to IMPERIALDRAMON, its power still isn't enough. As we would finally re-rotate to the battle going on between the dark forces and our heroes, as it was clear that with the involvement of Kentaurismon, this was now an interesting dynamic, as Kentaurismon would finally speak, telling all of the Digimon, "Halt! This is the end of your fighting. No more damage will come to the Nexus. You are all here, as this is your final warning." As our heroes would try their best to tell Kentaurismon that they were not their enemies. In fact, even Chaos Gallantmon tried to bargain, saying that the Dark Forces were here to take the Nexus's energy, as they had only seek answers. However, this would not be the case, as Kentaurismon seemed to be very untrusting of them, as all of them had appeared for no reason. However, Omegamon and Chaos Gallantmon didn't know what the right option was: fight a battle between two sides of enemies, or try to get Kentaurismon to understand. However, this fight was going to take another turn, as we would return inside the Nexus itself, as the Digimon that was placed there by Dark Knightmon had begun its process. As it began to absorb more of the energy, it realized that in order to finish its task, it still needed to do another distraction, as the Dark Forces probably wouldn't last had not received any allies. As all it kept repeating was, "Assimilate, assimilate, assimilate, danger, 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 threat, 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 adding, 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 precaution, safety, measure, initiated." As we would return to the area, back to the ice, as all of a sudden, around Ruin, dark holes began to appear out of nowhere, as these were orbs that had no abnormal appearance, as no one had summoned these. However, little did it know that Parasimon had to summon them, as in order to fulfill its mission, it was time to fulfill the next level of this situation, as power was now going to be added, as all of a sudden, purple lightning ran through Ruin to give it more as it was now connected to the Nexus itself through Parasimon, using the orbs as a link to give it more energy. As Ruin began to roar, as the power it was absorbing was becoming too much. Although Ruin's mind had already been clouded, what little remained was being consumed by the energy. However, being covered by more darkness, Ruin began to roar, as the wall of ice created by Kentaurismon began to crack. Surprising Kentaurismon, as this was enforced by the power of the Nexus itself. However, none of the heroes could stand up to it, and even Grey Knightsmon realized the situation was dangerous and decided it was time to get out of there. As all of a sudden, Ruin jumped into the air, as the power contained in this new energy from these 4 black spheres began to take a toll, as Ruin began to absorb more, and a very familiar sight to those who knew began to form as a dark ring began to surround Ruin. As Ruin's electricity, the purple lightning, began to break through, a very familiar sight, as we would see the other side of the area with a diffused Grey Knightsmon, as both Metal Greymon and Dark Knightmon viewed on.
Should we do anything?
No, Metal Greymon. We have seen everything we need, and with this part of Parasimon, the rest will deal with our mission. I have what I need now. We should get out of here. As both Dark Knightmon and Metal Greymon turned and decided to leave Ruin, as now Ruin had finished and completed its tasks that all it needed to, and its purpose was now left to be a distraction for them to escape. However, this was reaching its critical, as Ruin's power began to reach its zenith, and inside, the orb began to emit a light that did terrify everyone. Although not evolution, empowerment is something not to be trifled with, and with the explosion, Ruin arrived in its full power. This was a form not to be seen, as it had completely doubled in size, and its rage was unpalpable. As Ruin would simply roar around the battlefield, it was clear that it needed to be stopped, as its connection now to the Nexus allowed it to be an even more formidable threat, as if they weren't able to stop Ruin, this means Ruin could probably take over the digital world in itself, or cause massive damage by destroying the Nexus itself. As unfortunately for Kentaurismon, who tried to talk them out of it, it was now seemingly to join the allies in this battle, as our heroes now would form a raid battle against the new empowered Ruin, and to see if it was enough, they would only be able to hope. As we returned to the ice caverns, Pyldramon had got its bearings, standing back up, as it began to remember the situation that just took place, as it knew if it went back out to fight right now, it would stand no chance against Dynasmon, or any of the other Digimon for that instance. However, it knew that there was one way to do it, and it decided that it would travel back down into the Nexus to find that path, as it would reminisce on the moments before it re-emerged from the ice, as it would remember the battle it was having, as XVmon and Stingmon did battle against Dino Beamon deep inside the recesses of their memory. Unknowing to both at the time, this was their way of rekindling their past, yet they would have to do it in the harshest way possible. As both prepared their attacks, as Stingmon and XVmon jumped above Dino Beamon and decided that they knew that this was exactly what they were supposed to do.
X-Laser!
Spiking Strike! As both would land their signature attacks directly on Dino Beamon, believing that this was the cause and the only way to stop the rampaging Digimon, as clearly its power was unimaginable, as both attacks landed directly, causing massive damage, or at least so they thought, to Dino Beamon. As a cloud of smoke finally began to bellow around it, they believed that maybe Dino Beamon had been defeated. However, to their horror, it was not, as Dino Beamon roared out of the smoke, clearly not showing any signs of injury. As Dino Beamon's fierce and animalistic behaviors began to take toll, it jumped right up at Stingmon, grabbing it. As XVmon prepared to attack, it was immediately swatted away, as Dino Beamon's massive arms from the back were easily able to take it away. However, for Stingmon this was unfortunate, as it couldn't break free, as Stingmon delivered a blow, as a gnashing crunch was heard as it began to break, as all of a sudden XVmon heard it, and Unfortunately, it watched as Stigmon's body was tossed out from its arms of Dinobemon as it began to float to the ground with a massive hole in its chest. To this, Xvmon was shocked as it had just watched its brother effectively perish in front of it. However, it had no time to react, as all of a sudden Dinobemon turned its attention to Xvmon, as Xvmon realized that it was next. As it tried its best to hold itself off and pry itself from Dinobemon, Dinobemon was already on top of it. And as Stigmon laid there helpless, although able to hear, it knew it was too late. As withholding its brother, Dinobemon did the same thing, as a gnashing crunch was heard, as it punched straight through Xvmon. As Xvmon was abandoned, Dinobemon flew off, as Xvmon laid there with a hole forming in its chest as well. As Dinobemon did not speak, its animalistic tendencies keeping it from having it, it still just roared. However, both the brothers understood what it was saying on the inside, as it was yelling hate, rage, anger, all these emotions that at this time were somewhat foreign, but needed to be understood, for a whole being needs to know anger just as much as they need to know happiness. For as one needs to be sad, it can also bring joy. And for one who hates, love is also a part of it. As they both understood, they began to speak to each other. As Stigmon would try to reach out, but Xvmon would be the one who spoke, as it would say, "Brother, I know you're still there. Come, we can do this." As the hole began to form even bigger in both of them, as their bodies began to be essentially dissolved, it was clear that both still had the will to fight. As the holes began to get bigger and bigger, they felt like they were being overtaken by the rage, the pain, the sadness. They saw nothing, as Dinobemon simply stayed there. But, to a miraculous decision, both of them were able to turn their bodies in the direction of each other, as Stigmon would reach out with its head, trying to continue on, as it knew Xvmon wasn't going to give up either. "We're brothers," Stigmon gasped out, as both began to inch their way towards each other with what left of their bodies there were, as the holes began to stay. However, both with the determination, the feelings of understanding of what they have to do, however, surpassing their limits. They grew closer and closer. As both began to return their bodies, the hole began to disappear as their bodies began to reform. As Dinobemon looked on, as both finally reached each other, being able to make contact, their hearts were one. They saw it, they knew it, as a light began to emanate. It was time. As both of their hearts, for the first time in so long, had been connected by something beyond just hate, as they understood what they were, what they need to be, who they can be, who they were, and it began. As both of their souls connected, a bright light appeared, as they were uniting, as the flight of evolution changed itself, reforming their bodies, adding new elements to it, changing it to what it needed to be. However different, but also the same. It was something they knew, but also different at the same time. And as the light dissipated for once, they stood there, completed. As IMPERIALDRAMON was born. Unable to speak, IMPERIALDRAMON simply looked, as Dinobemon began to fade. However, IMPERIALDRAMON realized that they were never meant to fight Dinobemon, as they could never defeat Dinobemon, because Dinobemon was always them. The rage, the sadness, the anger, the feelings of never being able to live up to the expectations, to surpass their limits in the digital world prior, to never be able to save those that they cared about, being forced to take on more power, more anger, as it changed them and made them what they once were. Dinobemon began to fade because Dinobemon realized, as just as IMPERIALDRAMON had realized, that they were always the same, and they were always going to be connected. As Dinobemon began to disappear, its energy emanated into IMPERIALDRAMON in order to give it the remainder of the memories it had lost for so long. As IMPERIALDRAMON finally understood that after all this time, after all the time that would pass, and all the pain and suffering the memories lost, that this was their duty, what it was that they were seeing. However, they understood as well what the evildoers wanted, what their masters couldn't figure out. It was made clear because they had relearned everything about themselves. And as that moment disappeared in its mind, IMPERIALDRAMON ventured deep into the caverns, as it needed to head to the Nexus in order to begin the next step forward. The next step towards the road to tomorrow. As we would return to the battle taking place with the heroes, as we would see Kentorismon roar once again, Odin's breath, as the ice sheet formed, locking Ruin in place. Both Chaos Gallantmon and Omegamon prepared, as they had no idea if this was enough. As although Kentorismon is still connected to the Nexus in its own part, it is never fully adapted to using all of its power, as this would usually drive most Digimon mad, as connected directly to the Nexus leads to the flood of information that pours from not just the digital world, but worlds outside of their own knowledge. The places that still lead to be ventured by most Digimon. Omegamon knows them well, but has never dipped its mind into that energy pool, which could easily have destroyed it at some points. But Kentorismon knew that if they did not stop Ruin would continue to access the Nexus, and if it did, it could pull apart the digital world by unbalancing it. As the flow of information, as known in the real world, as well as in the digital world, is something that can't be disrupted. However, Ruin wasn't going to go out so easily, as within the ice sheet it began to struggle, and the ice began to crack, as it was very clear that Ruin wasn't going to be defeated so simply. By trying to stop it would not be the way to be able to defeat it, as the power it has received, the anger and rage that fuels it, has allowed it to surpass its limits far beyond anything that anyone's ever seen. And just like that, with its pulsing energy, it launched a new attack, something not seen, almost as if a barrier was formed around our heroes. They were locked in place, as Omegamon was shocked as they actually could not move, and as Chaos Gallantmon tried to, part of the Gram spear that it carries was actually stuck on the outside, as Kentorismon was shocked, as Chaos Gallantmon would be able to choke out, "Suppression! Suppression! It's suppressing us!" As all of them were realizing that they were stuck, as there was nothing more they could do. As Ruin's body began to stabilize more, it had full control of the situation, as although Ruin seems to be somewhat mindless, it's able to focus its energy, as now all three of these very powerful Digimon are trapped. However, this doesn't mean that it would last forever, as unfortunately for Ruin, it has other things to worry about, as from out of nowhere, it was hit. A massive power had attacked it. This was something it had not predicted, as there was one more Digimon on the battlefield. This was Dynasmon, who had finally arrived, as taking its chance to attack Ruin from behind was actually a very smart idea, as although Dynasmon is obviously a chivalrous opponent, it realized the situation, as with Kentorismon being one of its objectives to protect, it had to get it free. However, the boastful knight itself does have one problem. Sometimes it's a bit arrogant, as it would coddle both the knights that had arrived, but also Kentorismon, saying that how on earth could it deal with these ruffians, as it didn't really speak, more as flicking its wings at them. It was very obvious that this was something not to be ignored. However, from Chaos Gallantmon, it would tell Dynasmon, "Don't count it out." As from behind, the smoke clouds seemed to bellow, as although the direct attack from the breath of the wyvern made damage, it was very clear that something wasn't done, as it didn't seem that Ruin was completely gone. And as Dynasmon turned around, the smoke cloud began to shake and rumble, as it was very obvious that something was still in it. And to the horror of everybody else, it broke out, as Ruin was very angry, as it had realized it was attacked, and as it saw Dynasmon, it locked its eyes on it. However, all of them realized that there was no other option left, as they decided that it was time to do battle, as although Dynasmon isn't necessarily the most happy about the situation, it realized that if they were going to take down Ruin, they were going to do it together, as the clash between the two dragons would begin, as the white-colored dragon would take on the Dragon of Darkness, As we would finally return into the Nexus itself, the little piece of Parasimon that has remained to keep Ruin connected to the Nexus has continued to funnel more energy, as it continued to say to itself, disperse, disperse, energy, energy, connection, distraction, 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 focus, unfocused, unfocused. As the Parasimon itself, although being a part of the whole, is too small to pay attention, as it's only a little remnant of the actual Digimon. However, it could not see what was coming from behind it, as our ally and our hero, IMPERIALDRAMON, had finally arrived. As it snuck right up behind it, it charged one of its cannons, as it would blast a Desperado blaster, just a single one, to take out Parasimon, as this little fragment is nothing more compared to the real thing. As IMPERIALDRAMON would finally see the Nexus, it realized what it had to do, as in order to aid those above, it had to get the power it needed, and the Nexus was just what it needed. As terrifyingly as it was, IMPERIALDRAMON plugged itself in, and as it did so, the power of the Nexus itself began to jolt it, as it would start to roar itself, as this is something that's unbelievable, as most Digimon would actually be destroyed by this, because of Parasimon's ability to adapt so well, but simultaneously having no real mind except acting like a parasite allows it to not take the stress. But IMPERIALDRAMON is two merged into one. However, this was going to change, as the empowerment it would need was directly driven from the Nexus, so to take this energy and fight was the key. As we would warp back into the raid battle, they had pinned Ruin to a certain area, as all four of our Holy Knight Digimon were preparing to do more assault. However, Ruin was prepared, as one of its new attacks was finally ready, as the dome ring that it created before could be used as a shockwave. As its paralyzing twister was fired, as it knocked back three of them. As Chaos Gallantmon's shield did protect it, it did not protect it from a physical effect, blowing it away, as Kentaurousmon and Omegamon took a direct attack. However, this was done on purpose, as Ruin specifically wanted to deal in damage to Dynasmon. It didn't even fire it towards its back. So as it turned around, it immediately attacked Dynasmon. As Dynasmon tried its best, it roared, "I am the superior dragon!" But to this notion, this was quickly dismissed, as Ruin pressed even harder, and it immediately started to push Dynasmon down, as Dynasmon would go crashing into the ice, as it slammed its back in. However, Ruin was not one to let it go so lightly, as eventually it stepped on Dynasmon's chest, pressing it into the ice. As Dynasmon was unable to even break out any words, it was pressed, as all it could do was flash in terms of pain, as this was a lot of damage, as it was pressed into the ice so hard it began to crack underneath. As it seemed that Ruin was in the position to take out Dynasmon once and for all. However, as it began to struggle, Dynasmon tried to grab a hold of Ruin's foot, but it still was nothing, as Ruin looked down as Dynasmon, believing that it was going to finish it once and for all. However, from behind, a hole broke out, as a massive fireball launched out of the hole. This blast did massive damage, but not in the massive damage sense that we would expect, as it did distract Ruin long enough for it to actually leave Dynasmon alone, as it turned around, as it knew something was coming, as it could feel the pressure emanating from wherever that attack had come. And as the hole appeared, something came out. IMPERIALDRAMON lunged out of the hole, as it headed to the air, as a dragon began to appear alongside it, blue, reminiscent of even the wyvern itself that it had seen. Dynasmon knew something was happening, as this power was dredged from the innards of IMPERIALDRAMON itself. The power that had been long lost, however purified once before, finally began to take its shape, and then it happened. As the massive blue dragon itself decided to warp itself around its own owner, IMPERIALDRAMON began to evolve again, this to surpass its limits to its ultimate form, something far beyond what it had been holding back. And then it happened. From the light, a dragon emerged. This dragon had brought terror to the digital world, but wasn't the same. And from it, we had received IMPERIALDRAMON, as it had finally returned to the digital world in its form. This one, the power of light, However, this is different than before, as now the two souls that now remained inside of IMPERIALDRAMON have merged into the one being, IMPERIALDRAMON. As IMPERIALDRAMON would speak, "You, I know you." As Ruin would simply grumble, as it didn't really know what to make of the new dragon. However, it was clear that this wasn't going to be easy, as IMPERIALDRAMON allowed Ruin to get some space between it. It was clear something was different, as IMPERIALDRAMON began to pump up in size, as its connection to the Nexus was exactly what it needed. As in order to stop Ruin, it needed more power, and this power was at least temporarily found in the Nexus. As we would pan over, as we would see that the start of the battle between Ruin and IMPERIALDRAMON was about to begin. However, IMPERIALDRAMON would state, "I will save you from what I did to you." And as we wait to the next one, this battle will commence. In today's episode, the parts are different. As you have seen, there has been dialogue added as well as music to add to some of the additions to make the relative quality of the videos a bit better. They will take more time to come out, of course, but this is what I wanted to do and attempt. I've never been very good at voice acting myself, but I wanted to add this in because I do think these videos deserve a little bit more life, and it was one of the things I wanted to do. So here you guys go. But more importantly, I don't want to take it away from the lesson from today, as today's lesson is a pretty obvious one in itself to connect to all the other videos so far. However, this one's a bit different, as we can see those are gathering around together have a common enemy. The question is, will they be able to stand together once the enemy is gone, or will they be divided as always? Those answers are a little bit more for you guys to understand, because obviously there's something coming. But more importantly, we are beginning to see the road, the framework of what's going on. As the lesson that I wanted to dredge from today is that belief in oneself and understanding oneself usually are two different things. People who believe in themselves so much can sometimes ignore the fact that they're not perfect, and they can understand those abilities can make them very, very, very different. But it is actually coming to terms with oneself. Everything about them as an entirety is the most important thing. As if one cannot accept everything about them, they will always have a problem, a complex. And when you create your problems, you must find a way to solve them. As a message will be coming in the next episode to tie with this. Now guys, as always, this is Brad from the Ad Army signing off. And for all of you out there to sign on.